Welcome to the church family that is lifting lives through living love, inspiring hope, filling with faith, and transforming our world. These recorded messages are made available so that you might have additional opportunities to stay connected with us and that you might learn and grow in your faith. God bless you as you hear the word today. And now, the message.
Hi, I'm Dawn McKnight, and I'm going to be reading Acts 2:42 through 47 today. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. May the Lord bless the reading and the hearing of his word.
When I was a young boy, every Sunday afternoon was spent at my grandmother's house. We would go there after church, and my grandmother and my mom would kind of disappear into the kitchen in order to get the Sunday lunch ready and bring it to the table. And then afterwards, they'd, of course, clean up as well. And so my brother and I had these periods of time where it was just the two of us, and we could do whatever we wanted or watch whatever we wanted on TV. The challenge is that my grandmother did not have cable. She had basic TV, and this was like back in a day where basic TV meant like 5 channels, right? And so I remember there wasn't a whole lot for us to watch, and what sticks out in my memory is we watched one of two things. Either we watched bad kung fu movies, or we watched reruns of The Lone Ranger. Now, if you didn't grow up watching Lone Ranger, you've perhaps won't have the same feeling of nostalgia I have, but I still feel something in my chest whenever I hear the William Tell overture get started, right? Like here it is right there. And there was the image of the Lone Ranger riding breakneck and firing away. You'll hear it in just a second. Here come the guns. And then would come this voiceover. Here it comes.
A horse with the speed of light, a cloud of dust, and a hearty hi-yo silver. The Lone Ranger. Hi-yo silver! Away!
Now, I don't know if it does anything for you like it does for you, but it puts a smile on my face when I hear that introduction, you know? And I admit that the story of the Lone Ranger hasn't exactly worn well over the decades, you know, especially the part about his Native American sidekick, Tonto. You know, I've always got a tickle out of the Far Side, Gary Larson's take on it, that some years later, the Lone Ranger makes an unpleasant discovery when he learns that Kemosabe doesn't mean what he thought it meant in the Apache language, you know. So maybe not all of it has worn well over time, but there's still something enduring about the story itself. The story of a hero who rides in to save the day, and then at the end of the story, you know, the community wants him to stay for them to receive his thanks and his praise, but he can't stay because there's some other community, some other place on the horizon that needs his help. And so off he rides into the sunset. And every episode, there was someone left behind who asked the all-important question, who was that masked man? As someone in the earlier service said to me, the Lone Ranger was really ahead of his time because now we're all wearing masks, right? But, you know, that was the question. Who was this masked man? And something about that story, like I said, is enduring. It's even the way we sometimes tell the story of early Methodism. The way the Methodist Church began in our country, as westward expansion took place, with each new community that was founded, there was also founded a Methodist meeting house, a group of people, a class or society who are meeting, Zionsville included. That's how our church got started. But all these little Methodist, seeds, they didn't have pastors who were appointed to them. Instead, they were served by circuit riders who rode around on horseback from church to church, from faith community to faith community. And they weren't part of the faith community. They were there to serve its needs, and then they would move on to the next. The Lone Ranger rides again, right? And this kind of endures today. It's why pastors in the Methodist tradition often are itinerant. They stay for a period of time, but then they move on to the next church and the next church and the next church after that. When I went to seminary, in fact, before I even went to seminary, I went to seminary at Duke Divinity School. But I remember the morning when I first toured the campus, just to see if that was where I wanted to go. And that morning, a group of us met in a conference room. And I remember the dean of admissions, a man named Greg Duncan, came in. And as he was talking to us that morning, he brought up the Lone Ranger. And he says, a lot of Christians and a lot of would-be pastors kind of take this Lone Ranger mentality, the hero who's going to save the day. And then he says, there's no such thing as Lone Ranger Christianity. We don't exist apart from a community of faith. He says, in fact, perhaps the Lone Ranger story gets it backwards. Instead of the hero saving the community, maybe it's more true to say that the community saves the hero. And that's not to say that we aren't saved by the hero of our story, Jesus Christ. Every single one of us is saved by Jesus. And yet, I would go so far as to say the way we know Jesus, the way we experience Jesus, is through Christ's body. Through a community of faith, through a network, a web of love and relationships through which his presence and his grace is mediated to us. In today's story, let me just back up. In the series we've done, as we've been talking about the stories of our faith, each week we've told the story of some hero in the Bible. And most of those stories are individual stories. The exception, I would guess, would be Ruth and Naomi, who are kind of a pair. But today, in today's story, it's not a story about an individual hero. It's a story about a community. Because the truth is that our stories are not separate and apart from each other. The story of our faith is connected, interconnected. Every single one of our stories weave together, and they're all part of a big story that God is telling in the world. So our story today, we don't even know the individuals. We don't have names of all those people who are part of the early church. But the power of the story is that it's a group of people, a community of people who sacrificially love one another in order for Christ's body, Christ's presence, to be known in the world. The term that I really want to draw your attention to is a Greek word called koinonia. And koinonia, some of you may be familiar with that word. We call a lot of our small groups in this church koinonia groups because when they were founded, that was kind of the terminology that was circulating around. We see it in today's passage in the opening line. All the believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and prayer. When we see that word, the fellowship, that's koinonia. But as my professor, Dr. Jack Levison, who you met earlier this year, as he would say, koinonia, fellowship, is such a weak translation of that word. When I hear the word fellowship, I usually think of just hanging out with people, like enjoying a donut perhaps, or talking about our favorite Netflix shows, or bemoaning how the official in the Purdue game messed up a call and cost him the game this past Friday, if you watch that. I mean, that's fellowship, just hanging out and talking. But that's not what koinonia is in Scripture. Koinonia has a much richer and deeper meaning. It means to share and participate in something. just so you can get a picture of what koinonia means, I'm going to take you through the New Testament and all the different ways in which koinonia is used, the ways it shows up in Scripture. We're going to start with Paul's letters to the early church, specifically his letters to the church of Philippi. He begins his letter to the Philippians by saying, I thank my God every time I remember you. In all my prayers for you, I pray with joy because of your partnership, because of your koinonia and the gospel from the first day until now. So koinonia can mean partnership, a shared mission and purpose, working together for something, right? Go forward one chapter and he uses it in a totally different sense. That in this chapter, koinonia means a spirit of unity among the believers. He says, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, any comfort from his love, if any koinonia in the spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being of the same mind, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. So koinonia is about being unified together. And then go forward one more chapter, and again, he uses it in a different sense, here expressing union with Christ. He says, I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection and the koinonia of his suffering, becoming like him in death, and so somehow to attain the resurrection from the dead. So koinonia, you can also share in someone's sufferings. You can bear one another's burdens. That can be a koinonia, a sharing as well. That's just one letter in the letter of Philippians. Go to another letter, his letter to the Galatians. There he uses koinonia as an expression of friendship and inclusion. He's kind of laying out his credentials for the church in Galatia. And he acknowledges there was once a time when I was an outsider. I was a persecutor of Christians. But then James, Peter, and John, those who are the pillars of the church, they extended to me the right hand of koinonia. They welcomed me, they included me, they acknowledged me as friend and partner in the mission of the gospel. And they agreed we should go to the Gentiles and they to the Jews. So koinonia can mean so many different things. We're not even halfway done. Let's go to the book of Romans, shall we? And there, koinonia, Paul kind of uses not about a spirit of friendship or a spirit of unity, but he gets down to the nitty-gritty that it also means a material offering. The church at that time in Jerusalem was struggling with famine and persecution, and so Paul took up an offering from all the churches that he had helped plant, and he solicited help from them to send an offering back to Jerusalem. He writes to the Romans, he says, for Macedonia and Achaia, like two churches that were pillars of this, he says they were pleased to make a koinonia, not just a contribution, but a sharing for the poor among the saints in Jerusalem, that the koinonia of the church could extend all across the countries of the earth. To the Corinthians, he says the same thing, describing the same offering. He says, I testify that they gave as much as they were able, even beyond their ability, entirely on their own. They urgently pleaded with us the privilege of koinonia, that they wanted to share this burden and take up an offering for them. And so Paul says to the Corinthians, I implore you to be part of this koinonia. If you do, he says, then I tell you that men will give thanks for you. They will praise you. Go to the next slide. He says, for your generosity in koinonia, in sharing with them and everyone else. And Paul kind of roots and grounds this, and he says, this isn't just about an offering. It's about something we do every time we gather. It's about the communion, the act of communion. He takes them back and he says, every time we share the cup, is it not a sharing in the koinonia in the blood of Christ? And is not the bread we break a koinonia in the body of Christ? Because there is one loaf, we who are many are one, because we all partake of the one loaf. That's koinonia, that's oneness, it's sharing. And it's not just Paul who uses this. The Apostle John also loved the word koinonia. He used it throughout his letters to the early church. He begins his first letter by saying, we proclaim to you what we've seen and heard, so that you may have koinonia with us. And our koinonia is with God the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ. But then he warns them. He says, but if your koinonia is with us, if your koinonia is with God, then you can't have koinonia with darkness. Because if any of us claim to have koinonia with God and yet walk in darkness, we lie and do not live by the truth. Paul uses koinonia in the same way to say, what fellowship could righteousness and wickedness, what koinonia can light have with darkness? My point is in koinonia is about a sharing of all you are and all that we are together. It's not just fellowship that's so weak. It's about belonging to something, being part of something. That's what koinonia is. And so when we read that the early church dedicated themselves to the apostles' teaching and to koinonia, that doesn't just mean they enjoyed being around each other, they liked each other. It meant that they devoted themselves to common mission and purpose. They devoted themselves to praying for one another and carrying one another's burdens. They devoted themselves to meeting each other's needs. If there was anyone in their midst who had a need, they would sell their own property in order to help provide for those who were in need. It meant that they broke bread regularly as a sign of their covenant together. And it meant if there was anyone in the community, koinonia even extended out to those who are in need, to widows and orphans and sick and hungry and poor and in prison. The koinonia of Christ's body would reach out to them and bring them in as well. If the early church had only dedicated themselves to the apostles' teaching and not to koinonia, if they had just each independently tried to live out their faith on their own, the story of the gospel would be so much less. It would have been a short-lived movement. The power of the early church was their koinonia. It was their radical devotion to one another. It was their sacrificial love that gave to the world a witness about what the love of Christ was really like. They were a tangible expression of the grace of Jesus Christ. And so here's where it gets back to us. If your story is a Lone Ranger story, you're missing out on God's story. Even if you save the day, if at the end of the story you ride off into the sunset and you leave behind you people who are asking, who was that masked man? Who was that masked woman? I didn't really ever know them. If that's your story, God has a better story for you. And it's a story of koinonia. It's a story of belonging to a community where you are known, where you are loved, where you are supported, and where you offer the same back to those in the community. Koinonia is a gift from God, and it changes our story, because from then forward, our story is not a me story. It's an us story. And when we're living out an us story, the burdens get easier and the work becomes more meaningful. The sting of disappointment and failure is softened, and the victories are all the more sweet. My question to you today is, how does your individual story, how does it connect into a larger story, a larger community of people who are experiencing the grace, the redemption, the triumph of God in their midst? Now, I deliver this sermon on koinonia on an auspicious day, don't I? Because we are more scattered than ever. This Sunday is our last Sunday to worship together in this space for the rest of the year, perhaps longer, we don't know. The coronavirus is forcing us to go back into our homes and to tighten our circles of fellowship all the more. And so it's even more important for us to lean into the truth that we are connected by something bigger, that God unites us together. I mean, I know as I preach this morning, there are those who are watching who haven't stepped foot in a church the last 8 months. And many of you don't even know when or if you'll ever be able to come back. And this burden of isolation, it falls most heavily on the aged or those who have vulnerabilities or risk factors. It's so important for us to live into and practice koinonia with one another. Though we have to socially distant for the sake of safety, that's okay. We are still called to be connected to one another. Though our world divides us politically in so many different ways, we have to kind of remove that wedge and recognize that we are called to be one because we serve one Lord, one head of one body that unites us all around his grace and his love. This is why when the coronavirus started, we started taking communion every single week, because this is our koinonia. This is the sign that we are connected. Even if we are scattered, we are connected by one Lord, one King, one body, one grace, one love. And every time, this is our story. And we live it out. We live it out by calling each other, checking in with people you haven't seen. Every time you text someone, call someone, anytime you go by someone's house and visit on the porch or talk to them through a window, that's koinonia in action. Every time we pray for one another, every time we pray together for the needs of our world and our community, that's koinonia in action. Every time we take up an offering, not just for the needs of the church, but for the needs of the world around us, whether it's Angel Tree or Fletcher Place or Family Promise or hurricane relief, whatever it is, when we extend our resources to those who are in need, that's koinonia in action. And every time we gather, even if it's not physically together, every time we gather by Zoom, Facebook, live stream, or every time a small group meets, every time even a family gathers around a table and we worship together the name of Christ, we share in his body and his blood. We remember that where 2 or 3 are gathered, Jesus promised to be present among us, mediating his grace and his peace and his presence to us. Ours is a we story. It's a story of us. And don't get me wrong, us can be messy, it can be difficult sometimes. But when the chips are down, that's when we give thanks. There are people around us that God has given us to carry our burdens and to lift our hearts, so that we might together in koinonia experience his grace and love in our lives. Our closing story that we want to tell is from Ramona Paulsrud, who's a lay leader, who is the lay leader of our church, and who has a powerful story of how in a time of need the church surrounded and lifted her. And now she lives out this ministry among us as well. Here's Ramona's story.
I'm very fortunate that I came from a very strong Christian family, grew up in Nebraska. My father was a farmer, and he felt it was God's gift that he farm well, take care of the land, that he helped feed his family and those around him. My mother, on the other hand, was also a strong Christian, but she experienced it a different way. She nearly died 4 times during my life. She was diagnosed with diabetes and with breast cancer, and she never gave up. So I think that's where I get my faith and my love for Jesus. Now, my husband had the same type of background, and we met after I had finished nurses training. He was still a student and was planning to be a biochemist, which he achieved. It was very important to us to find a good church home. We had a great marriage for 51 years, and then came that diagnosis of esophageal cancer. We weren't quite prepared for that. When the diagnosis came, we found lots of support. Don Porter helped by staying with John so that I could run some errands. And Joe Flynn, who was in charge of Stovetop Shufflers, said, "We'll cook for you guys." And I said, "Oh, no, we don't need that." Well, she didn't listen, thankfully. And then there was my good friend, Della Arnold. She kept insisting that we spend some time walking, and I just did not want to leave John. So she didn't push it. But when he passed, she came and said, "Okay, now we're going to walk." She let me talk, let me share. We laughed, and I began to really heal. And that's the reason that I think that one day as I was walking out of church, Pastor Perry was greeting everyone. And I said, "Pastor Perry, we need to have a support group for those of us that have lost a spouse. We talk about our families. We talk about our obstacles. We talk about our faith. We have grown to be a very, very warm and caring group." The other thing is, I can think back to everything that happened through this journey, through John's illness and through the time of his loss. God had a finger and a hand in every step of the way. When we stay in contact with God, there is trust, there is faith, and there is hope. There's hope for all of us, even in this crazy world today. Even as we reach times of heartache and stress, God is there, and that's His promise. My name is Ramona Paulsrud, and this is my story.
We have one last treat this morning that we wanted to share with you. This is our Commitment Sunday, which is a Sunday that we ask for all those who are members of our church, all those who belong to our Koinonia fellowship to make a pledge for the coming year, to make a koinonia, a sharing for the coming year of how you will sustain your gifts to the church. If you're a guest, a visitor this morning, we just want to say thank you. We're glad you're worshiping with us. We hope that someday this will become your church home. We'd love to be that family for you. But if this is your place, if this is your faith family, if this is your koinonia, we ask that you make a pledge for the year ahead. There are pledge cards that were sent out this past week. We have some available in the lobby. If you make the pledge online, the thing you'll notice is it's not just about money. As United Methodist, we asked you how you're going to be involved by prayers, presence, gifts, service, and witness, because it's all of us. That's what koinonia, it's all of us sharing all we have together. Before we do this, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to all of you who have continued to support the church during a difficult year. I've been humbled by so many people who've sent in checks or dropped them by the office. It's been a hard year, but thanks to your gifts, we haven't had to close the church. We've suspended Sunday morning worship, but we haven't had to lay off staff. We've been able to continue our ministry on Sunday mornings and throughout the week to our church members and to our community, and I want to say thank you. And this pledge, this commitment you make now, it's not just about supporting a church budget. What I want you to think about is the story of our faith, the story of your faith. What difference has the church made in your life? And we give in order to keep that story going, that we might pass it on from generation to generation to generation to the glory of God. But before we do that, to close our worship today, we have a video that we want to share with you to kind of capture the story of this past year. And I admit, as you watch it, that some of the opening sequences were pre-COVID, and they're a reminder of where we've been. It feels like a long distance away, but it's also a reminder of the hope of where we'll be again someday. And we remember, whether we are full or empty, whether we are in plenty or in need, we celebrate the God who is faithful to us in every circumstance. Here's the story of our faith.
O sovereign God, O matchless King, the saints adore, the angels sing, and fall before the throne of grace. To you belongs the highest praise. These sufferings, this passing tide, under your wings I will abide, and every enemy shall flee. You are my hope and victory. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one, clothed in power and in grace, name above all other names. To the valley for my soul, thy great descent has made me whole. Your word my heart has welcomed home. Peace like water ever flows. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one, clothed in power and in grace, the same above all other names. Oh, praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one, clothed in power and in grace, the name above all other names. Yours is the kingdom, yours is the power, yours is the glory forever. Yours is the kingdom, yours is the power, yours is the glory forever. Praise the Father, praise the Son, and praise the Spirit, three in one, clothed in power and in grace, the name above all other names, the name above